The day Ethan Carter was escorted out of the glass tower he had spent 5 years designing, everyone thought they were watching the downfall of a quiet architect. Employees lined the hallways as security took his badge, his laptop, and his access card. At the center of it all stood Victoria Blake, the celebrated CEO who had just claimed credit for the most ambitious skyscraper project in the country. She smiled for the cameras while Ethan carried a single black portfolio under his arm and walked away without a word. What nobody knew was that the billion-dollar tower the project investors were calling the future of the skyline could not legally exist without the documents inside that portfolio. Victoria believed she had eliminated the one man standing between her and global recognition. Instead, she had just triggered a chain reaction that would freeze construction, terrify investors, ignite a corporate scandal, and destroy everything she had built. Because Ethan Carter wasn't leaving with office supplies or personal belongings. He was leaving with the original designs, the patents, and one legal right that could bring an entire empire to its knees. And before the city learned the truth, a single father and his 10-year-old daughter would watch the most powerful woman in real estate discover the devastating cost of stealing someone else's genius. 5 years earlier, Ethan Carter was just another name hidden deep inside the organizational chart of Blake Holdings. While executives attended conferences, posed for magazine covers, and negotiated billion-dollar deals in luxury boardrooms, Ethan spent his days surrounded by blueprints, engineering models, and endless calculations. He was the kind of architect few people noticed, but everyone depended on. Every morning before sunrise, he prepared breakfast for his 10-year-old daughter Lily, helped her get ready for school, and drove her across town before heading to the office. Their life was modest compared to the wealthy executives he worked for, but Ethan never complained. Since losing his wife years earlier, Lily had become the center of his world. Every decision he made was for her future. At Blake Holdings, Victoria Blake had recently announced the company's most ambitious project yet, a revolutionary skyscraper that would redefine the city's skyline. The proposed tower would be taller than any building the company had ever constructed, featuring advanced environmental systems, unprecedented energy efficiency, and a structural design capable of withstanding extreme weather and seismic activity. Investors called it impossible. Competitors called it a fantasy, but Victoria promised shareholders it would become the symbol of a new era for the company. The problem was that nobody could make the numbers work. Several prestigious architectural firms submitted proposals, but each version exceeded the budget by hundreds of millions of dollars. Engineers warned that many of the concepts were too risky to receive regulatory approval. Month after month, deadlines slipped while investors grew impatient. Behind closed doors, board members began questioning whether the project should be cancelled altogether. That was when Ethan quietly presented an alternative. Instead of flashy presentations, he arrived at a technical review meeting carrying a simple stack of drawings. Over the next 3 hours, he explained a completely original structural system he had been developing in his spare time. The design used a unique load distribution framework that significantly reduced material costs while increasing stability. He also introduced a proprietary modeling method that allowed engineers to predict structural stress with unprecedented accuracy. By the time he finished, the room had fallen silent. For the first time, the impossible project suddenly looked achievable. Within weeks, Ethan was assigned to lead the architectural development team. Engineers who had previously dismissed the tower began supporting the project. Construction consultants praised the efficiency of the design. Financial analysts calculated that the new framework could save hundreds of millions of dollars throughout construction. The project that had been on the verge of collapse was suddenly moving forward faster than anyone expected. Yet while Ethan's influence inside the company grew, his public visibility remained non-existent. Victoria insisted that all media communication flow through the executive office. Press releases highlighted her leadership. Magazine interviews praised her vision. Television appearances celebrated her innovation. Reporters referred to the skyscraper as Victoria Blake's masterpiece. Ethan rarely appeared in photographs. At first, he didn't care. His focus remained on the work itself. Every evening he returned home exhausted, often carrying sketches and engineering reports to review after Lily went to bed. Sometimes she would sit beside him at the kitchen table doing homework while he refined structural calculations late into the night. "Will your tower really be the tallest building in the city?" Lily asked one evening. Ethan smiled. "It might be. And will everyone know you built it?" He paused for a moment before answering. "The important thing is building something that lasts." Lily nodded, but she wasn't entirely convinced. As construction approvals approached, the project's reputation exploded across the industry. Investors committed billions. International media outlets began covering the development. Government officials publicly praised the project for its economic impact. Victoria's popularity soared alongside the growing excitement. But inside Blake Holdings, something else was happening. Small changes began appearing in official documents. Technical reports that once listed Ethan as lead architect were quietly revised. Presentation slides removed his name. Internal memos credited entire departments instead of individual contributors. At first, Ethan assumed it was administrative oversight. Then one afternoon, Olivia Grant entered his office, carrying a folder and a worried expression. "Ethan," she said quietly, closing the door behind her, "I think you need to see this." When he opened the folder, his expression slowly changed. The latest investor presentation described the tower's breakthrough structural system as an innovation developed under the direct leadership of Victoria Blake. His name appeared nowhere. For the first time, Ethan realized something far more dangerous than office politics might be unfolding behind the scenes. And while investors continued celebrating the future of the billion-dollar tower, someone at the top of the company was already preparing to rewrite its history. The more Ethan investigated, the clearer the pattern became. What had initially looked like a few harmless omissions was actually a systematic effort to erase him from the project he had built from the ground up. Every week brought another discovery. Internal reports were being revised. Archived meeting records were quietly updated. New presentations credited executive leadership for innovations that had originated entirely from Ethan's work. The deeper he looked, the more disturbed he became. One morning, Olivia arrived, carrying another stack of documents. "You need to compare these," she said. The first file was a technical proposal submitted 6 months earlier. Ethan's name appeared throughout the document as lead designer and creator of the tower's structural framework. The second file was the version recently distributed to investors. His name had vanished. Entire sections describing his research had been rewritten. The innovations remained. The creator did not. Ethan sat silently for several minutes. "Who approved these changes?" he finally asked. Olivia hesitated. "The executive office." Neither of them needed to say Victoria's name. Across the city, Victoria Blake was enjoying unprecedented success. Business magazines featured her on their covers. Television networks called her the visionary behind the most ambitious skyscraper project in modern history. Invitations to speak at international conferences arrived almost weekly. Share prices continued climbing. Investors praised her leadership. The more recognition she received, the more aggressively she pushed Ethan into the shadows. Meanwhile, the pressure inside the company intensified. Construction permits were nearing final approval. A multi-billion-dollar financing agreement was scheduled for signing within months. Once the contracts were finalized, Victoria would become one of the most influential executives in the real estate industry. But there was one obstacle standing in her way: Ethan Carter. One afternoon, Victoria summoned him to the executive floor. The office, overlooking the city skyline, was larger than Ethan's entire apartment. Victoria remained standing by the window as he entered. "You've done excellent work," she said, without turning around. "Thank you. The project is entering a new phase." Ethan sensed immediately that something was wrong. Victoria finally faced him. "From this point forward, all external communications will go through executive management." "I've never handled external communications." "Good." The smile on her face never reached her eyes. "Then there won't be any adjustment required." Ethan said nothing. Victoria walked toward the conference table. "Investors need confidence. Governments need confidence. The public needs confidence. Projects at this scale require a single face, and that face is you." Victoria smiled. "Exactly." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan asked the question she clearly hadn't expected. "Do you intend to acknowledge the team responsible for the design?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The company is responsible for the design. The company didn't create it." Victoria's expression hardened. "Be careful, Ethan." He met her gaze. "I created the structural system. You created it while employed by Blake Holdings." "No." Victoria frowned. "What do you mean, no?" The research began years before this project existed. For the briefest moment, uncertainty flashed across her face. Then it disappeared. "None of that matters. It matters if ownership becomes relevant." Victoria laughed softly. "Ownership?" She stepped closer. "You seem to be forgetting something. Without Blake Holdings, nobody would know your name." Ethan remained calm. Without another word, he stood and left the office. But Victoria's confidence was no longer absolute. That evening, she called a private meeting with several senior executives and legal advisors. The discussion lasted nearly 3 hours. Most participants never learned the full reason for the meeting. But one conclusion emerged clearly. The company needed complete control over the project before investors signed the final agreements. And complete control required removing Ethan from the picture. Over the following weeks, the campaign intensified. He was excluded from major meetings. Access to certain project files was restricted. Executives who once sought his advice suddenly avoided him. Rumors began spreading throughout the company. Some claimed he was difficult to work with. Others suggested he was being reassigned. A few even whispered that he might leave voluntarily. Only Olivia seemed willing to speak openly. "They're setting you up," she warned. "I know. You need to protect yourself." Ethan nodded. The truth was that he had already started. Late each night, after Lily fell asleep, he reviewed contracts, patent registrations, engineering records, and years of research documentation. Every file confirmed the same fact. The revolutionary technologies behind the tower had never been transferred to Blake Holdings. The company possessed licenses to use portions of the work during development. Ownership remained his. The patents remained his. The original designs remained his. And most importantly, several critical approvals depended upon intellectual property rights that only he controlled. The more documents he reviewed, the more one realization became impossible to ignore. Victoria wasn't simply taking credit. She was gambling an entire billion-dollar project on the assumption that he would never fight back. Then came the final warning. Late one evening, Olivia entered his office, looking pale. Without speaking, she handed him a printed agenda for an executive board meeting scheduled the following morning. Ethan scanned the page. Halfway down, he found the item that mattered. Organizational restructuring and leadership realignment. Attached to the agenda was another document. A confidential recommendation. His recommendation. Termination of employment. For a long moment, the room remained silent. Outside his office window, the city lights stretched toward the horizon. The tower he had created was already being celebrated around the world. Yet the people benefiting from his work were preparing to throw him out of the company he had helped save. Olivia looked at him nervously. "What are you going to do?" Ethan slowly closed the folder. Then he looked toward the black portfolio resting beside his desk. Inside were years of research, original design records, patent certificates, licensing agreements, and every piece of evidence proving where the project truly began. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "I'm going to let them make their choice." Neither of them knew it yet, but by this time tomorrow, Victoria Blake would make the single most expensive mistake of her entire career. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Blake Holdings earlier than usual. The city was still waking up, and sunlight reflected off the glass exterior of the tower headquarters. Employees moved through the lobby carrying coffee cups and laptops, unaware that the company was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Ethan stepped into the elevator holding the same black portfolio he carried every day. Inside were years of work, years of sacrifice, years of late nights after Lily had gone to sleep, years of research nobody else had been willing to fund. As the elevator climbed toward the executive floor, he felt surprisingly calm. There was no anger, no fear, only clarity. When the board meeting began, every seat was occupied. Victoria sat at the head of the table. Marcus Reed occupied his usual position near the center. Several senior executives lined the room. Legal advisors waited along one wall. The atmosphere felt strangely formal, as if everyone already knew what was coming. Victoria opened the meeting with a presentation celebrating the project's progress. Investor commitments had reached record levels. Government approvals were nearly complete. Media attention continued growing worldwide. Every slide reinforced the same message. The future had never looked brighter. Then she reached the final section, organizational restructuring. The room grew quiet. Victoria folded her hands. As Blake Holdings enters the execution phase of this historic project, leadership efficiency is critical. After extensive review, executive management has decided to streamline several departments. Ethan remained silent. Victoria continued. "Effective immediately, the position of chief design architect will be eliminated." Several people shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Marcus frowned. Victoria pressed forward. "Mr. Carter's responsibilities will be absorbed by the Executive Design Committee." The statement was carefully crafted, professional, clinical, calculated, but everyone understood its meaning. Ethan was being removed. Victoria turned toward him. "Thank you for your contributions to the company." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Marcus finally broke the silence. "Victoria, are you certain this is wise?" Victoria smiled. "The project is fully developed." Marcus looked unconvinced. "The project may be developed, but Ethan's expertise has been essential from the beginning, which is precisely why his work has already been integrated." The response came too quickly, too rehearsed. Marcus leaned back without saying another word. The decision had clearly already been made. Victoria turned back toward Ethan. "Security will assist with the transition process." The humiliation was intentional. Several executives looked visibly uncomfortable. Others stared at the conference table. Nobody defended him. Nobody challenged the decision. And that was exactly what Victoria had expected. What she had not expected was Ethan's reaction. Instead of arguing, he calmly stood. No outrage, no accusations, no desperate attempt to save his position. Just quiet acceptance. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Victoria's face. "Is there something you'd like to say?" she asked. Ethan looked around the room. Then his eyes settled on Victoria. "Only one thing." The room became silent. "I hope you've reviewed every document carefully." Victoria frowned. "What does that mean?" Ethan simply smiled. a small, almost sympathetic smile. Then he picked up his black portfolio. "I'll be leaving now." Without another word, he walked toward the door. The silence that followed felt strangely unsettling. Several board members exchanged confused looks. Victoria forced a confident smile. "Thank you, everyone. That concludes the meeting." But even she couldn't explain why she suddenly felt uncomfortable. Downstairs, security officers escorted Ethan through the building. Employees watched from offices and hallways. Some looked shocked. Others looked guilty. Word spread rapidly through every department. The architect behind the billion-dollar tower had just been fired. As Ethan approached the lobby, Olivia caught up with him. She looked furious. "They actually did it." "Yes, you can't just walk away." "I can. They stole everything." Ethan looked toward the revolving doors ahead. "No." Olivia stared at him. "What do you mean, no?" Ethan lightly tapped the portfolio in his hand. "They didn't take everything." Before she could ask another question, he shook her hand. "Take care of yourself, Olivia." Then he walked outside. The doors closed behind him. For the first time in years, Ethan Carter was no longer an employee of Blake Holdings. Across town, Lily was finishing school when her phone buzzed. A message from her father appeared. "How about pizza tonight?" A few moments later, she replied. "Did something good happen?" Ethan looked at the message and laughed quietly. Then he typed back. "Something important happened." That evening, while Victoria attended a celebration dinner with investors, Ethan sat at a small pizza restaurant with Lily. The contrast couldn't have been greater. At one table sat executives discussing billions of dollars. At another sat a father and daughter sharing pepperoni pizza. Yet only one of those tables knew what was about to happen. Back at company headquarters, Victoria hosted a private gathering for investors and senior leadership. Champagne flowed freely. Screens displayed renderings of the future skyscraper. Applause echoed through the room. Victoria raised a glass. "To the future!" The guests cheered. Nobody noticed Daniel Ross standing near the back of the room reviewing a newly delivered legal file. At first, he assumed it was routine. Then, he opened the attached documents. His expression changed immediately. He turned another page, then another. The color slowly drained from his face. One of the patents referenced in the project's engineering package was registered solely under Ethan Carter's name. Daniel frowned. That wasn't unusual by itself. But the next document was worse. Then another, and another. By the time he finished reading, a cold feeling settled in his stomach. The project's most important structural technologies were not owned by Blake Holdings. Several critical licensing agreements appeared to have expired the moment Ethan's employment ended. Daniel looked up toward Victoria. She was laughing with investors, completely unaware. For the first time, he realized the company might be facing a disaster unlike anything he had ever seen. And somewhere across the city, Ethan tucked Lily into bed, placed the black portfolio on his desk, and quietly opened a folder labeled Intellectual Property Enforcement. By sunrise, the future of a billion-dollar skyscraper would depend on a single signature. And that signature belonged to the man Victoria Blake had proudly thrown out of the building just hours earlier. The next morning began like any other at Blake Holdings. Construction managers arrived at the project site before sunrise. Engineers reviewed schedules. Contractors prepared for another day of work. Across the city, financial analysts updated projections, showing record profits once the tower was completed. To everyone involved, the future still looked unstoppable. At 8:17 a.m., that illusion shattered. An urgent email arrived simultaneously in the inboxes of senior executives, legal counsel, investors, regulatory agencies, and construction partners. The subject line contained only 7 words. Notice of intellectual property violation. Within minutes, confusion spread throughout the company. By 8:45 a.m., panic had begun. Victoria was halfway through a television interview when her phone started vibrating repeatedly. At first, she ignored it. Then she noticed the messages were coming from Daniel Ross. 1 message, then 5, then 12. Finally, a single text appeared. "Call me immediately." Victoria excused herself from the interview and stepped into a private room. The moment Daniel answered, she knew something was wrong. His voice sounded strained. "Where are you?" "Why?" "Because we have a serious problem." Victoria frowned. "What kind of problem?" There was a pause. Then Daniel spoke carefully. "The kind that can stop the entire project." Silence. Victoria laughed. "That's impossible." "I wish it were." 20 minutes later, she stormed into the executive conference room. Daniel had already assembled a legal team. Stacks of documents covered the table. Victoria immediately recognized Ethan's name appearing throughout the files. Her irritation turned to anger. "What is this?" Daniel slid a folder toward her. "Read it." Victoria opened the first page, then the second, then the third. The confidence slowly disappeared from her face, because for the first time, she was seeing documents she had never bothered to examine before. Patent registrations, research filings, engineering copyrights, technology ownership records, licensing agreements. Every critical innovation that made the tower possible traced back to one person, Ethan Carter, and every document showed the same thing. Ownership had never been transferred to Blake Holdings. Victoria looked up. "This can't be right." "It is." "No." She slammed the folder shut. "We paid him." Daniel's expression remained unchanged. Paying an employee and owning a patent are not the same thing. Victoria felt a knot forming in her stomach. He developed those systems while working here. Some of them. Daniel pushed another file forward. But the core technology was developed years earlier through independent research. The registrations are valid. The patents are valid. The ownership is valid. The room fell silent. For the first time, nobody had a solution. Then came the second blow. A representative from the City Regulatory Authority joined the meeting through video conference. His expression was grim. "Effective immediately, all structural approvals connected to the disputed technologies are suspended pending review." Victoria stared at the screen. "What?" "The project cannot continue until ownership issues are resolved." Construction permits were frozen. Engineering certifications were frozen. Safety approvals were frozen. Everything stopped, just like that. A project worth billions had become a giant hole in the ground. By noon, contractors were shutting down equipment. By 2 p.m., workers were being sent home. By sunset, construction fences surrounded a silent worksite where thousands had been working only hours earlier. The media learned about the suspension before the company could prepare a response. News channels interrupted regular programming. Business publications published emergency updates. Financial networks began asking dangerous questions. Who really designed the tower? Why wasn't the company aware of the ownership issues? Had investors been misled? The headlines multiplied by the hour. Meanwhile, Ethan sat quietly in a modest office across town. For the first time in years, he wasn't surrounded by corporate politics, only paperwork. His legal team reviewed filings while he worked calmly through the afternoon. Then his phone rang. Victoria Blake. He stared at the screen, declined the call. 5 minutes later, she called again. Declined. Again. Declined. By evening, she had called 12 times. Not once did he answer. Instead, his attorney sent a formal response. The message was brief. Blake Holdings no longer possesses authorization to utilize any protected technology owned by Ethan Carter. All unauthorized use must cease immediately. Future discussions will occur exclusively through legal counsel. Victoria nearly threw the letter across her office. For the first time in her career, she felt powerless. She had spent years controlling every room she entered, every negotiation, every employee, every investor. Yet the one person she believed she had defeated now held complete control over her most important project. The following morning brought another disaster. Richard Hayes, the project's largest investor, arrived at headquarters unannounced. The atmosphere changed the moment he entered the building. Executives rushed to greet him. Nobody succeeded. Richard walked directly into the boardroom. Victoria followed. Several board members joined moments later. The billionaire investor dropped a stack of newspapers onto the table. Every headline told the same story. Project suspended. Ownership dispute threatens billion-dollar development. Architect claims rights to core technology. Richard looked directly at Victoria. "Tell me, this isn't true." Victoria attempted to explain. He interrupted. "Yes or no?" The room became silent. Finally, Daniel answered instead. "It's true." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, the disappointment was obvious. "You raised billions based on technology you didn't own." Nobody responded. "You told investors the project was secure." Still silence. Then Richard delivered the sentence that would send shockwaves through the company. "Until this issue is resolved, my firm is suspending all future funding." Victoria's face went pale. The room erupted. Board members began arguing. Executives demanded answers. Lawyers started calculating potential liabilities. And somewhere in the chaos, Marcus Reed sat quietly, watching everything unfold. For weeks, he had sensed something wasn't right. Now, he was beginning to understand the full truth. The company's greatest asset had never been the tower. It had been Ethan Carter, and they had thrown him away. As night fell over the city, the once celebrated project stood completely abandoned. Cranes were motionless. Construction lights were dark. Investors were fleeing. Regulators were investigating. And Blake Holdings was bleeding millions of dollars every day. Yet the worst part was still coming, because buried deep inside years of company emails and internal records was evidence that would soon reveal exactly how Victoria Blake had stolen credit for the work of a single father who had only ever wanted to build something extraordinary. And once those records surfaced, the billion-dollar project would no longer be the biggest scandal in the city. Victoria Blake herself would become the story. In the months that followed, the truth finally came to light. Internal investigations uncovered emails, reports, and meeting records proving that Victoria Blake had deliberately removed Ethan Carter's name from key documents and taken credit for innovations she had never created. What began as a dispute over ownership quickly became one of the biggest corporate scandals in the industry. Faced with overwhelming evidence, investors withdrew their support, regulators launched formal inquiries, and the board of directors was forced to act. Victoria was removed as CEO, and her reputation collapsed almost overnight. The billion-dollar tower she had hoped would secure her legacy was left unfinished, standing as a silent reminder of the cost of greed and dishonesty. Ethan, however, chose a different path. Rather than spending years fighting old battles, he focused on building a new future. Joined by Olivia Grant and several former colleagues who had witnessed the truth firsthand, he founded his own architectural and engineering firm. This time, every contribution was recognized, every agreement was transparent, and every team member received the credit they deserved. Slowly, clients began to arrive, then investors, then major development contracts. The same people who had once doubted him now sought his expertise. His reputation grew not because of media attention or corporate influence, but because of the quality of his work and the integrity behind it. 2 years later, Ethan stood beside his daughter Lily at the grand opening of a remarkable new building that had become a symbol of innovation and ethical leadership. Hundreds of guests filled the plaza outside while cameras captured the historic moment. Mounted near the entrance was a bronze plaque bearing the name of the project's lead architect, Ethan Carter. Lily smiled as she looked at it. "You finally got the credit you deserved," she said. Ethan looked at the plaque for a moment before turning toward the crowd. "Maybe," he replied softly. "But that's not the part that matters most." Lily tilted her head. "Then what does?" Ethan smiled. "The fact that we built something worth remembering." A few moments later, Lily asked the question she had been carrying for years. "Do you still hate Victoria?" Ethan glanced toward the distant skyline, where the abandoned tower still stood unfinished. Then he shook his head. "No. Holding on to anger only keeps you trapped in the past. I'd rather spend my time building what's next." Together, they walked toward the entrance, as applause echoed around them. At that moment, Ethan understood a lesson many people never learn. Others may steal your title, your position, or even your recognition for a while. But genuine talent, hard work, and integrity cannot be taken away. In the end, those things always find their way back into the light. And while Victoria lost everything trying to claim someone else's success, Ethan achieved something far greater. He built a legacy that truly belonged to him.
Thank you for watching my video.